In this video, we will show you how to replace your rear brakes, pads, and rotors on this Chevy Silverado. This will be located behind your rear wheels. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing you need to do is safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've done that, let's continue on to removing our center cover using a 22mm socket. Quick inspection of that, set it aside. With that out of the way, let's continue on with our 22mm socket. Now we're removing each of our 6 lug nuts and then the wheel. A quick inspection of each of your lug nuts, replace them as necessary. Let's have a look at our caliper. Along the back side of the caliper is where you're going to find a 10mm headed bleeder screw. If there's a cover, go ahead and remove that now. Once you've done so, continue on with a collection bucket under the area. Use a 10mm to open up your bleeder screw. Wait until you see a steady trickle of fluid coming out. Now you can close off that bleeder screw. Let's make our way to the caliper slider bolts. We'll be using a 13mm for this. Just a quick inspection of that mounting bolt. We'll start it right back in, just a couple threads here. Fully remove the lower bolt. Let's hold on to that caliper while we remove that final bolt. At this point, let's take hold of the caliper. We'll slide it out of place and rest it up on top of the leaf spring. Just use a pry bar if necessary. Now that we have it off of there, the next thing that we need to do is make our way back to the bleeder screw. When we open up the bleeder screw, it's a good idea to have a collection bucket under here, and we're going to be pushing back the caliper piston. That will force fluid out of the caliper and into a collection receptacle. Got my hose leading down to my collection receptacle here, my 10mm. Put this on there. We'll continue on with a caliper compression tool. Make our way right in the center of this piston here and along the back side of the caliper at the same time and squeeze those two areas together, gently pressing the caliper piston in. You need to make sure you have that bleeder screw open, otherwise you could force fluid the wrong way up through your braking system. There we are. Now once you have that pressed in, quickly confirm around the dust boot area here that you do not see any brake fluid coming out. If you see any fluid coming out around the dust boot, that means that the seal internally on the caliper is bad and you have to replace the caliper. Let's close our bleeder screw with our 10mm wrench. Make sure that's snug. We're going to be reopening it when we go to bleed the brakes. Now let's remove our brake pads from the caliper bracket. Take hold of that. Quick inspection of that brake pad. We'll set it aside. Along the back side, let's continue on with removing our 18mm caliper bracket mounting bolts. We have 2 of those. Remove your bracket and set it aside. Grab onto that rotor, give it a wiggle to remove it. If it's stuck in place, you could lightly tap on it with a hammer. There it is, friend. Clean down the mating surface where your brand new rotor will sit. For this, I'll be using a cloth sanding disc. You could also use a wire brush if necessary. We'll clean the mating surface and clean and inspect the emergency brake shoes located behind this area. A little anti-seize. All right, let's prepare to install our brand new coated rotor. Now that we have this in place, let's go ahead and clean up our caliper bracket and prepare it for installation. As for the caliper bracket itself, we're going to remove each one of the 2 caliper slider pins. There's one on each side of the bracket. When you go to pull this out, you're going to find that you have a rubber protective boot. You want to be careful not to damage the boot when you do remove the pin. We'll just go ahead and separate that. Clean and inspect the pin here. You want to make sure it has a smooth surface where it goes in and out of the caliper, but you also want to pay attention up in this area. This is where the boot will sit. You need to make sure it's clean and free of any debris. There we are. I've got this pin cleaned up. We'll do the exact same thing to the other pin. Both those slider pins look perfect. We can set those aside. At this point, we'll continue on with the bracket itself, paying attention to those 2 slider ports. Commonly, you would want to remove the boot from your caliper bracket and then clean out the inside of the bracket. When you go to remove these type of boots, they will be damaged and you have to replace them. So with that said, to clean this, we are not going to use any parts cleaner in here because that will swell the rubber. Let's use a bore brush and carefully make our way inside. Pop this out where we can have a quick look. Double check to make sure it's soft and pliable, not torn, worn, or damaged in any way. Do the exact same thing to your other slider pin port. Now we can clean the areas of the bracket where the pads will sit. You can use a wire brush or a piece of sandpaper. At this point, we have both sides of the caliper bracket cleaned up. Let's continue on with lubricating our 2 slider pins. When you lubricate these, you want to make sure that you coat the entire shafted area here, making our way all the way up to where my fingers are located, where that small groove is. By putting lubricant into that groove, that'll help ensure moisture and debris cannot make its way into this port. Press it in, make sure it's completely sealed, we'll give it a little twist. A quick wipe, make sure it's seated properly, and do the exact same thing to the other slider pin. Now the next thing we'll do is take a little bit of high temperature caliper lubricant and lubricate along each side of the caliper where you had cleaned down. We don't want very much grease here. We only want enough lubricant to help protect the area. Let's get these shims on here. Slide that right in there. Double check to make sure it's secured in place. Do the exact same thing to the other side. All right, let's get this over to the vehicle. Let's get this bracket in place. Start in each of your 2 caliper bracket bolts. Make sure they're cleaned, and it's a good idea to use a little bit of blue thread locker on that threading. Start them in by hand, snug them up, and then torque those to 138 foot-pounds. Now it's time to install our brake pads. Looking in the kit, you want to make sure that you find 2 brake pads, each with a wear indicator facing downward here. Slide these right into the bracket. Double check to make sure they can move around. You definitely don't want to have to hammer them in. If you do, that means you did not clean the bracket well enough. These feel fine. Now let's focus on the caliper itself. Use some high temperature caliper lubricant and lubricate the caliper piston. Once you've lubricated that, continue on along the backside of each of these 2 forward ears. This will help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Now that we have this lubricated, let's slide this into place. Continue on with your 2 caliper slider bolts. Once again, make sure the threading is cleaned and use some blue thread locker. We'll start these in by hand, snug them up, and torque each of these to 31 foot-pounds. At this point, we can reinstall our wheel. Go ahead and slide it into place. Start on all 6 of your 22mm lug nuts and bottom them out. Let's get the wheel up on here. With the wheel safely on the ground, let's torque these to 140 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. If you have a center cover, go ahead and install that now. Looking at the center cover, you'll find that you have 6 little caps. Each one of those caps fits over a lug nut. Go ahead and start them on and snug them up by hand. You should not use an impact tool for this because you could damage the caps. Okay friend, we showed you how to install one side of your rear brakes. The process for one side of the vehicle is the exact same thing as the other. Once you've done that, make your way into the passenger compartment and pump up that brake pedal till it's nice and firm. After you've done that, go ahead and quickly check your brake fluid, make sure it's topped off with .3 brake fluid, and then take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.